I have a voice in Albany. This is Get Your Hand Out My Pocket. Get it out, keep it out. I don't want it in it. I'll shoot you. No, I'm playing. I'm playing. What's going on, everybody? I hope you're enjoying your wonderful day. It's cold out there, it's snowing, but hopefully we make the day go a little bit better. I'm here with two distinguished guests, 2 and 3 here on the mics. I have Tabitha. She didn't want me to tell her last name, so you guys don't steal her identity. This is a short conversation that we had. She thought someone was stealing her identity, but I don't think that's going to happen. And my good brother here, who I'm just meeting now, so we're going to meet together.
Chindi.
Chindi. I love the name. Now, what we're going to talk about today is, I'm a member of the local organizing committee, Justice L.O.C, and we had a showing of the 1804 Haitian Revolution. And after the show, we had a brief debriefing where we talked about what we saw, what we gathered from it. Is it something that we can duplicate? Granted, the documentary had a lot of blood, violence, and gore, but we were just talking about in terms of mindset and maybe duplicating that in a way that is far less violent as an oppressed people taking care of an imperialistic power and a colonialistic power and removing them from power, thus taking back to the land. Now, Tabby, I want to start with you, and you gave me credence to say Tabby, so I can call you Tabby, because I got that out of the way. We'll start with you. What was your thoughts initially after watching 1804? What was the first thing you thought?
I was so, what's the word I want to say? It was gratitude was the thought, thankfulness. Just briefly, without going in too deep, I think it's an important story that it changes the narrative of slavery. I think it enlightens people to aid the brutality of it, the lack of humanity, but also in contrast, the fact that regardless of where we were on the planet during that institution, that has not ended, it still continues to today, but during that incarnation of slavery, we were resisting and, winning as a result of that resistance. So I think that was an important synopsis to walk away with.
I think that, and I would like to get a couple questions from you, and I'll go to the good brother to kind of start it off. Just the length of the documentary, because I understand that there's a lot of people, especially Haitian people, who know a good amount about that revolution, want specific things in any documentary about the Haitian Revolution, and they would argue you have the significance of voodoo in it, how powerful that was in terms of empowering the people there, Boukman and certain key individuals and their what they brought to the revolution, even though all of them were eventually killed, especially Boukman. Just the point of attack in regards to the oppressed Haitian slaves there. The first thing they did in terms of the attack, and we'll kind of dial back and go around in circles or whatever, but the thing that stood out to me was that the poisoning part. If you recall that I forget the individual's name, but he had taken herbs and vegetables and different things that the island gave him and made small incremental poisons, and they would poison the Africans on the island who were maybe not wanting to have that revolution or work with the white supremacists on the island, and they felt we have to get rid of those first. Now, I want to make this a question, Danny. I want to make this a question.
Do you support shooting when you do this?
Have you ever thought about poisoning anybody? No. No, but just that point of knowing that a change has to be made, right? And you're going to meet resistance from people who you shouldn't meet resistance from. For the betterment of the entirety of everybody, that this change needs to be made. Because while these people, oppressed people or oppressors are in power, you have people dying regularly, you have malnourishment, you have all these disproportion of resources and things of that nature. And the best course of action is to change this, make it essentially a socialist society where everybody's sharing and reciprocity and things of that nature. What's your thoughts on, all right, we have to eliminate the faction that is going to stop us from doing this, that looks exactly like you?
The gentleman was Mackendall.
Mackendall, there it is.
The significance of what he did is significant throughout the course of history and all the struggles worldwide, I think, because there's gotta be the sort of where you engage directly, but then there's the sort of subvert, like what do you call it, subterranean efforts, covert, if you will, guerrilla warfare. They've had our place in our struggles around the world also.
Right.
So I think he was really kind of like a strategist. Whether you like or dislike what he did, I think he was thinking strategy, and he laid the groundwork for the revolution, which ultimately was a success. So there's nothing negative I could say about his actions. It's sort of like throughout history, even the Art of War talks about the ends justifying the means. Malcolm X talked about that. El-Hajj Malik Shabazz talked about that. So it's sort of like, if you think about, if you have a mission and you have an objective and you take certain steps to complete your mission, then he did what he had to do to sort of lay the groundwork. And people knew what his mission was, his ultimate goal. So although he lost his life in that process, people wanted to there's a saying that comes out of the Bible and out of other things too, out of numerous historical texts, that say, I'm not doing it for this generation, I'm doing it for those who come after me.
Right.
He didn't get to see the fruition of his ultimate goal, but other people carried it out ultimately for him. And I think as far as everybody they talked about in the movie, I was getting concerned they wouldn't talk about the Dutty Boukman. I was not disappointed when they brought him up, because we alluded to the fact that I come from a Jamaican background and people don't realize the synergy of the islands. Jamaica had its resistance continuously throughout the process. In Florida, they had resistance continuously throughout the process. In South America, it was always resistance, resistance, resistance. And even in the plantations in America, they were breaking the tools, they were setting the stables on fire, causing chaos, and basically we always had that mindset of resistance. We were never submissive. We were in this plight, yes, but we always had our strategies that we tried to free ourselves. So I think that was the important message of the entire movie. And as far as, on the nature of how he was being captive, he could only poison people to free himself. He could only do something sort of like secretive to sort of free himself, because if he tried to, kill his master, so-called master, or try to kill somebody, then they would kill off him and his whole family. So he had to kind of do something subversive. So I think it's kind of like a lesson that there's a solution for every problem, and his problem was his captivity, and his solution was that eliminating the adversaries, eliminating the people that would be barriers to me, and then eliminating these people who are really keeping me captive.
It's funny you mentioned about their schooling, the education that they're receiving. They're saying it doesn't pertain to me. It's outdated, and it's something that I can't connect with. And there's the resistance there to learn this, because they understand it's some level of indoctrination. They maybe can't explain it, but those can essentially be the spirits of the islanders that you were talking about, our ancestors who fought continuously, did little things like you said, burning down stalls, constantly resisting. This wasn't going to be an easy win like they may say it is to be. And if you watch all the movies that continuously come out, 2017, we still have a slavery movie. I can't understand
but
that.
They don't highlight what's necessary. And then I think to that point about, and this is a big discussion in education worldwide, is the cultural responsiveness of said education. And I think the beauty of these films is that it kind of whets your appetite to go dive into the material. Okay, what else can I learn about Vodun? It's an African spiritual system. It also persists in Cuba. It also persists in South America. It came over with us. We didn't lose it. We didn't lose our identity. We kept our identity. It just manifested a different way. And I think you kind of go down the rabbit hole of information, and that empowers you. So once you have this you're making informed decisions about what you should do today. And actually, Haiti, as far as impacting further generation, was a huge inspiration to Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey was a huge inspiration to Malcolm X. Malcolm X was a huge inspiration to children that came out of that movement in the 70s. So basically it persists, that sort of like energy can't be destroyed. That energy they started continue inspiring people to this day.
Good brother, I'm going to come to you, and I'm gonna kind of flip the question a little bit, because I can go in further into 1804, but something came to my mind when you mentioned Malcolm X. And for whatever reason, Gandhi came to my mind. I think you mentioned Gandhi, as a matter of fact, in a discussion with James Farmer and a couple other civil rights leaders in the 60s. And they were talking about just civil rights in and of itself, the proper way of attacking this beast to change society as it is. And they mentioned Gandhi's movement in India and the nonviolent movement. And that's where Dr. King got the idea in regards to what was the phrase that was used?
Nonviolent resistance.
Yes, nonviolent resistance. Right there. I knew you would be right there. I knew it. But getting it from Gandhi, now equating that level of revolution to 1804. and kind of have that juxtaposition and that compare and contrast of the two different movements, which were successful actually. So if you want to kind of go into kind of compare the two or give some background between both revolutions and kind of have that, all right, what is that common denominator in regards to the success and how it was done?
The common denominator, I think, is sacrifice. The willing to sacrifice, and it's very important whether you choose the non-violent resistance or you use violence as a resistance. I personally like, sort of the idea of the Haitian Revolution and the idea of resisting the enemy by any means necessary, which Malcolm X kind of talked about. And this is very, very important. So if you look at it, sacrifice is very important here because we don't like to sacrifice. And that's how I see it. It's basically, I don't want to sacrifice not eating, eating less than 3 meals a day or something like that. And so it's sort of a lot of things like that happens in the movement. It's the problem of the lack of sacrifice. And this is why Machiavelli said, who had decided to get rid of the people who, the folks who are like us, who would be snitches. I hate to use the word. And go ahead and tell other people about, tell the resistance and drop our movement. We have to go against those kind of things. But at the same time, I think it's very important to realize that each generation is different. I think sometimes non-violence is necessary, where the enemy has so much force that it's almost impossible to use military means to win. Yeah.
And another point of 1804 in regards to, because I think about technology as we're utilizing technology now, and then in 1804 there was really no technology like this. Matter of fact, there was no technology like this. And what they agreed upon in terms of the start, and how are we going to start this, because we all have to go at the same time. And then someone eventually had jumped a gun in regards to starting on time, but they said, okay, we'll take a handful of rocks, and each day you drop a rock. When that last day goes, when that last rock drops, then you start. And now it's kind of like, all right, we're gonna text now, start the revolution now. Emoji. When I send this emoji, everybody attack. And then the people who you're trying to overpower have the same technology. They intercept, and they'll be ready for you if you do everything through technology. And how, even though that can be the case, technology still can be used to have a successful revolution, a successful overthrowing, because we can understand, all of us here, we're here for a reason. If we were elitists and we had elite pockets, we would not be in this room right now. So you have to think, all right, well, I'm barely keeping my head over water. Something needs to change. Well, the present government as it is a capitalistic government. The government itself isn't the government as you see. People outside of it who have the money and the resources and the power control the government, make the decisions, right? We are not those people. The only way we can really make a real change in things, or a real dent in things, is that unification. We talk about non-violent means, whether we do it non-violently or violently, and the non-violent seem to be, when someone's punching in your face and you don't punch them back, it's a level of masochism there, simply because the first law of order is to protect yourself, and it was that fight against that. So in 1804 there was none of that, and one thing I loved about 1804, I'm gonna go back to you, and I'm not familiar with martial arts. I like a little boxing. I watch my highlights. I jab, I dip, I move, and stuff like that. I can do that, but I'm not a professional fighter like my good brothers out there. Elijah Tillery's out there. He was a professional fighter, but they had different types of martial arts that they utilized during that revolution. And if you want to go into the regards to knowing that self-defense mechanism, that if I don't have any weapons, myself is a weapon in and of itself. I don't have anything in my hands, but if 3 of y'all come at me, and I can disarm one of you, or I can survey the situation, because guns weren't automatic guns back then. You took one shot, then you had to reload and all that stuff. So if you miss, then I have a chance to combat you. Now, what can you do against me with my skills? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, that was the excellent part of the 1804 when I was watching them using poisoned darts, for example.
Yes.
A lot of using their bodies, just diving. I saw that. I think in one of the documents, I saw the guy just dive on that dude with a gun. And even if you have a gun, if you see somebody moving so fast against you, you just panic.
Right.
I mean, and so it was really amazing how they fought. But also, the only one part that missed, which was, by the way, every documentary is going to have one part that they missed, was the idea that Dessalines and Toussaint introduced the concept of total war. The war that Sherman copied and used against the South in 1865. They didn't talk too much about that, 1864, 1865. But the idea of total war, being willing to use all means and destroying everything, making your enemy bend down. Because they were used to comfortability. So if you burn everything, they have nothing to leave them.
Right.
You know, you take out the economic aspect of the enemy. That was the idea of Toussaint Dessalines. And so it's when you use when you don't have enough resources and you know how to live with very little, and your enemy is used to abundance, taking their abundance away from them,
Break their spirit.
I mean, we'll break their spirit pretty quickly. I mean, I always talk a lot about how we can use our economics to resist the system, because you know what, people today have gotten too comfortable.
Yeah.
If they had no cell phone for 2 days, they'll begin panicking. And so those kind of things, we gotta think like that, and that's how the people in the Haitian Revolution thought. They thought that.
Yeah, we have a few minutes before break time. I want to kind of get in a little bit about Napoleon, the Napoleon complex, and his impact on the revolution in and of itself. And that when we hear about Napoleon, we obviously hear about the complex, and a person who's less than 5 feet and just angry and dictatorial, you know.
You're taller than 5 feet.
They say it's a myth, but
and basically anybody who's shorter than everybody else in the room, we call him Napoleon. But his impact in regards to he had his #1 general down. I forget his name. What was his
Talleyrand?
And yes.
No, Minister.
No.
Oh,
The
the
tall
guy.
guy was damn Ash.
No, Rochambeau.
Rochambeau.
Yeah,
Rochambeau.
Rochambeau. And him once being defeated, being allowed to get on the ship and return home. Oh, God. That makes me mad.
Rochambeau was
Day.
the #1
To this
general
day.
of
But
the revolution.
just Napoleon and his tactics in regards to dealing with the Haitians up until that revolution, if you want to go into that a little bit.
Well, the unfortunate thing is Napoleon did dominate the world. He did conquer the world in terms of his concept of what the world is, the Mediterranean, and having France's colonies and such. What brought Napoleon down in his personal life is the same thing that caused him to lose in the Haitian Revolution. Having that, to your point, egomania, that grandiosity, that I can take over everything and no one can defeat me and I can win, is what actually caused somebody very close to him. That's why I thought you were talking about Talleyrand. They talk about this in the 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene. Talleyrand knew how that his personality was so sort of magnified that if he played into that, he can control Napoleon. And he did it all the way until his demise. That was his demise, I think, in the Haitian Revolution also. So yes, he had the might, yes, he had some political knowledge, yes, he had like the will to win, but I think the Haitian will to win was stronger than him, and he greatly underestimated that. He actually made the statement, and I think he was intimidated because he made this statement. Let's not forget, France went into Egypt, saw all of that, realized that it was an older culture. You know, they had the knowledge and the intelligence to realize an older civilization made this, and this civilization was probably black. Come to find out, it was black. However, he was very intimidated by the fact that I think the Haitians was going to cause the forward movement of blacks around the world. And he wanted to stop that, and unfortunately he couldn't stop that. But he did, ultimately. He was scared of that.
Well, thank you, Tabby, for that last bit of information. We're going to take a quick break. This is Mr. X in Albany, and I'm with two people, and I ain't record none of that, so. Wow.
Do it again.
And we're back.
Crazy.
We are back.
All right. Man, and we are back. I am Mr. X, listening to WCALP 107.3 FM, The Arts, Albany, New York. I have a voice in Albany. Get your hand out of my pocket. We're talking about 1804. And Tabby, during the break, was like, I have a point I want to make, so we're just going to go right into her point, and the good brother's going to follow with his point, because I don't want people, when they got great points, to be like, I got it. I don't want them to lose it, so I'm going to get right to them so that they can go to the point. That'd be great.
Thank you. So we've talked about, you've made me think of this when you talked about technology and about like, okay guys, on this emoji go, and how that is really actually to our extent, it's a disadvantage. We think there are some advantages that come out of technology, but the way we utilize it and the way we utilize it and the fact that we don't own these platforms is a huge disadvantage. And two things I wanted to talk about is the fact that although our ancestors didn't, study agriculture and farming, and although they didn't, go to political science school and things of that nature, get degrees and things of that nature, their mission was for liberation,
Right.
but in actuality their goal was justice,
Right.
because really what they did was liberate the island, liberate themselves from tyranny,
Right.
ultimately, and then liberate the island for them to be utilizing it. They
Right.
knew that previously there were Tainos and natives, indigenous people on the island that were wiped out by this beast called slavery, and they knew that they were more or less like the inheritors of that legacy. So they liberated the island with the concept of justice. So they started, working the land, owning the land, having their own identity associated with the island until there was an IT people and community. And the other point I wanted to make was about the technology. No, they didn't have phones. They didn't have faxes. They didn't even use smoke signals for what. Maybe they did actually, but they used spiritual technology. They centered themselves in African spirituality and the indigenous ways of their ancestors. And so, even though they had a lot of diversity among them, they sort of said, "We're coming together under this idea, this face," and it becomes a personhood. You become a person again because you're not, doing something that sort of was stolen from you and being forced to do something else. You kind of centered yourself in your identity as a person of African descent. So I think that was the most revolutionary thing about the revolution. And I think the movie did a good job overall, hitting so many points, talking about so many people. And Shindy had sort of like a alternate view or alternate perspective on the way Toussaint was demonstrated, and you wanted to go in about him as a character in the movie.
Yes, go ahead, brother.
Yes. For Toussaint, I felt like they were kind of like it was an overly emphasis on Dessalines, which I understand why, because everyone knows Toussaint, people don't know Dessalines. But at the same time, I think the skills of Toussaint were very much underestimated. What I think is that Toussaint understood that in order for that country to be able to stand by itself, you had to co-opt some of the Western technology into Haiti once it became independent. I've had this thought experiment for myself as if Toussaint had been alive after independence, after 1804, and both him and Dessalines were leaders of that country. What would have happened is that maybe Toussaint would have been able to co-opt that technology so that when in 1825, I think it was, when the French came with their ships and forced the Haitians to pay reparations. Reparations for what? When that happened, they would have been ready, and not just militarily ready, but economically ready as well to be some sort of an economic power. This is very, very important because another country had the same problem that slightly in a different sense than Haiti, like Japan, where Americans came and just walked into Japan. It was really an insult for the Japanese. And 30 years later, they had the technology. They had co-opted the Western technology, but maintained the culture of their own culture. And I think that's very important to realize what are the strengths of this group of people. Can we co-opt those strengths and use them to maintain our liberation and independence? That's very important.
The beautiful thing about the 1804 Haitian Revolution is that it can be an intellectual conversation. You have the gamut of African people in regards to this documentary or this story, simply because the activist, the revolutionary, the YouTuber, the historian, the high school teacher, we all can kind of get together and sit down and whoever has their types of information and whatever have you, how much studying that they did will come about in regards to this type of discussion. 1804 Haitian Revolution, boom, here it is on the table, and everybody's in the room. Oh, Nasheed and Boukman and this and that, and the economic constraints that were put on Haiti thereafter, and the French come back with their soldiers thereafter and saying, listen, we're going to fight again, or you're going to pay us all that hell that you gave us. Like, wait a minute, why I got to pay you for my revolution? What game is this? And let's go into that. the fact that, obviously we're going to go into Haiti in its current state, which stems back from that revolution. But the fact that afterwards, being victorious, all of a sudden, we're cut off from all resources outside the island. The trade and barter is cut off because we whipped everybody's behinds. So talk about the fact that if we were to have a successful revolution, like we talked about, we're all here. We're not swimming in money, otherwise we wouldn't be somewhere in Florida somewhere because it's snowing outside. When you're rich, you don't see snow, unless you want to. You go to the mountains and you go skiing, it's a trip. But when you're rich, I'm going to the sun everywhere it's at all times of the year. We here it's snowing, cold, and freezing. We have a successful revolution, right? Now it's a whole new society. And all of a sudden, reinforcements come. And now we all beat the hell. We can't fight another war. You got more soldiers than you did when you had over here before. Talk about winning, but not really winning.
Sure. I mean, I think what comes to mind is, okay, back to Napoleon's no forward movement of blacks around the world, back to his point.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you guys run your independence. We can't be complete savages and re-enslave you now. And if we try, we have all these sort of sister cultures, sister neighborhoods, we have sort of like these sister countries around you that will sort of retaliate also. So, basically the fear is if we try to re-enslave you or recapture the island, we're going to look like savages and or reap sort of the repercussions of the neighboring, people who empathize with you as a country.
Mm-hmm.
So what can I do? Okay, I can make it look a little bit more civilized. And this is what people have to realize. The origin of the modern capitalism has its origins with slavery, because it has its origins with the shift from mercantilism to laissez-faire capitalism. Most of the people who profited from slavery were on the loan end, people who loaned money for people to build ships, the leadership, the royals and things of that nature. This is the origins of capitalism, the origins of what were they doing with the slave? They were buying them. They were trading goods. This is like where it all began. Wall Street has its origins with being like associated with slavery. So all of this is sort of like the beginning of the sort of blue collar shift from blue collar, regime to the white collar sort of crime. So what they did was put these economic sanctions on them so they can never stand on their feet, and they would always be crippled, so to speak. And then they get to walk away and say, well, you guys had your shot at leadership, but you're not doing so great. Well, yeah, and also you by force have a sort of in now this debt slavery. So you taken us out of captivity and put us into slavery in another form.
Yes. Talk about the Haitian financial sanctions that are going on as of now. Am I correct that I think they just paid back the debt? Was it
just very recently?
Just like yesterday?
And also contrast that with the fact that there are companies who caused our economic crisis who were given bailouts. Uh-huh. People who basically were instrumental in pushing the buttons that caused that CEOs, and they were given what are called golden parachutes. So they left their company without being humiliated. And the golden parachute was hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars as they left. But then contrast that with a country who is underdeveloped, for lack of a better term, and isn't really competing economically with other countries around it. And then, aside from the sanctions, there's also just the economic warfare they're subjected to. They have money coming. They have rice coming in when they can grow their own rice. They have pigs coming in, right, so that devalue. And this is like this contributes to their sort of lack of economic viability also.
Oh wow! And imagine the diseases and things that are in those imported resources. Destroy the natural crops that you have at the island that are tainted, and you bring in tainted material, and the global depopulation agenda that's going on, especially in the dark world. But to talk about, because it's all stemmed from the 1804, the climate crisis in Haiti, the earthquake, and the fact that things continuously happen. There are these man-made devices that are utilized to destroy the people there whenever the number rises. Pharaoh, let's throw all firstborn sons into the lake so that the alligators can eat them. That religious almost dynamic that's going on with Haiti that we can't seem to get out of the way when things start to maybe turn. And Wyclef Jean was in the documentary as well. The fact that he had some ideas, from what I've heard, in terms of being the leader and president of Haiti, but getting pushed out. And knowing that because of his popularity as a magician, the changes he would have been able to do, people we would have been bringing in for the betterment of the Haitian people, and him not having that opportunity to be president, and then you have a Western-backed president continuously put in power. To talk about in regards to that, winning the 18 or so-called winning the 1804 revolution, and then now you still have a Western power-backed presidents in Haiti.
One reason was it stems from the origin of what Mekandau's mission was, which was to poison those black folks who were going to undercut the revolution. And I hate to say this, the elites of Haiti have undercut the majority of Haitians. It's not only like the Western world has this absolute power that they can control. They don't. That's why Haiti won the 1804 revolution. That's why that revolution happened, because they don't have absolute power. If you know what to do with the resources and the knowledge, you can beat the system. But you have to be together. If you have people conniving with the West and gaining a lot from, they had dictators. They had Papa Doc and I think Baby Doc. These guys were ruthless people, just took resources out of Haiti and didn't develop the country, didn't do anything for the country. All those resources were going to Western, sometimes even Western charities, and nothing was going to Haiti itself. So it's very sad when you look at the whole history and you see that the main reason why, when I look at Haitian history, that Haiti failed to develop was not only because of the Western world. The Western just exploited that weakness. It's because the elites of Haiti have failed Haiti. They've gone out and used their own money, their own power to enrich themselves rather than help the country.
Yeah, and clearly Wyclef was a threat because they smeared his foundation. Meanwhile, post the earthquake, a year later, just within a year, they found that none of that money from other NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and not-for-profits were really being utilized properly in any effective way. And he was okay. I think they just blew something up to make him look bad. And then secondly, he was attacked or shot. People don't remember this, but Bob Marley he was going to appear at a rally for, yes, and right before he could, a group of individuals, unidentified men, bum rushed his house and ended up shooting him, which shows you that when you have somebody who's sort of like convening a message, musicians are kind of like messengers. They know how to communicate directly with the people, reach people in a way they can understand. Right. That's a huge threat. Yeah. And when that person gets political, and then if you look at our music, modern music, even our early hip hop was kind of political. It had a political wing to it. Yeah. We had a party wing and a political wing. These days, the political wing is like the smallest slice of hip hop music.
It's funny that you mentioned that because I had just seen an article about a CIA agent, and this is how it happens. This is how information a lot of times leaks. CIA agents who have done their dirt throughout their life or on a deathbed and now just going to purge themselves, if the white Jesus is there to open the gates for them to come through. And this particular gentleman has been doing assassinations for 17 years, and he said he admitted to Bob Marley's assassination. This is what they've done, and once they release something, they have been doing it for 66 years. Like the technology we get, they're 50 years ahead of us. So everything we get is, you're like, the CIA said they'll have way more advanced stuff. Eventually they're going to have the flying car. They may have it already, I don't know. But this is how advanced they are. That they gave Bob Marley that shooting that you were talking about was a CIA sanction. It was to scare him, to give him warning, stop. And he went into the concert anyway. Mm-hmm. And so this agent said he got credentials to go up because he took a little break in the hills of Jamaica to relax and exhale. He had a wound that he was healing from, and he went and he just kind of relaxed and exhaled, and he came with gifts with a pair of Converse. And in the Converse shoe, he had a nail. And we know he had gotten cancer through the toe.
Yeah.
And when he stepped on that nail, it was it. And the CIA agent, as soon as it broke the toe, he said, ow, he was already dead. He didn't know it. And the telling thing about it was, he was always there guiding him to go to treatment plants to expedite the cancer so that it would grow faster and he would die quicker. Obviously, because he's not going to stop working, Bob was going to work until he died. So I'm trying to expedite this thing. They wanted to get away from the Medgar Evers, the Malcolm X, the Martin Luther King. They had to find a new way to kill political activists. There was too much blood and gore and guts. And we were resisting, as you talked about. We were burning down cities. 9 cities burned down after Dr. King died. It really woke people up. It was like, this guy is peaceful. He literally said, let our blood flow in the streets if it's going to be blood flow. And you killed him. So all this was going on. They said, we're going to try something different. Amos Wilson, Khalid Muhammad, all these activists who had died through so-called natural causes, there may be some foul play.
And that's actually a strategy that goes all the way back to Roman times. They, when you think about if you want to make a parallel to the Judeo-Christian analogy, what happened with Jesus is the same thing. You know, if you want to make that analogy, he was a subversive element in their empire who was like sort of starting a movement, and you know, it's a major parallel. Another parallel is even in the 30s and the 40s with Billie Holiday. She was talking about the lynchings, and it was supposed to be like a public discussion. It was supposed to be something that we didn't have in the public or whatever. She made a song. Songs go on the radio. That's the most public you could be at the time. There was really wasn't TV. Yes, and the FBI declared war on her. So, you know, again, back to musicians, back to people who kind of try to be leaders and things of that nature. You end up, you know, in the forefront, and you ultimately then get the X on your back.
Yes, that's exactly what you do, and that's not a job everybody wants to sign up for in terms of leading revolution. There were 4, getting back to the documentary, there were 4 major persons that the documentary highlighted. And one that was intriguing to me, I'm going to ask you to go into this gentleman. I know you don't want to talk about Tariq Boukman.
Yes.
And his relevance and his role within the documentary. And it's unfortunate because I got 2 children at home and a wife, and then when we showed the documentary, I'm meeting people and moving around, so I really couldn't sit down and observe and indulge all the information that was coming about him. So you can kind of catch me up in regards to his role in the revolution, because he wasn't alive when it actually happened. He was killed before then, correct? So kind of go into his role and his significance within that particular revolution.
For Boukman, I think he was it's the courage that he had, and also the fact, was it Boukman who had said, and correct me if I'm wrong, Tabitha here, who had talked about that he was gonna come back as a mosquito.
I think it was Mackendall.
Mackendall was the one who did that.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, but I think the fact that who came from Jamaica, Boukman, right?
Yep.
Boukman. Yeah, he came from Jamaica, and the idea was to break him, and he couldn't be broken by the system, by the slavery system, and this is very important because they are going to try and break you. If you look at it from a perspective that if he gets broken, there's no revolution. Without Boukman, there's no revolution. There are 2 sons of this world, even though in my era, and all those other guys, they're joining in later on. Boukman is the beginner, he's the start of the whole, the activator, sort of like the match that starts the revolution. And so it's he's a very important figure. And I think the most important thing about him is that his courage, his willingness to face his killers, and his refusal to surrender to the end. And this is very important because when you're having a revolution, you can't surrender at any point. You can't give in.
And for historical context, throughout this is not really covered. It's not in depth. They don't talk about it in history, but the resistance was so persistent throughout all the islands, and Jamaica in particular. My mom's side, we descend from the Maroons who liberated themselves. They freed other slaves. They ran into the mountains, and they, for lack of a better term, defeated the British, if you want to be parallel with Haiti defeating the French. And to this day, they're still their own sort of liberated place. Boukman, being in Jamaica, first of all, when he stopped in the Caribbean, it was such brutal slavery that was like the training camp to get to America. So if you couldn't get to America, if you couldn't hack it in America, then you were going to die in the Caribbean, because that's where they called it seasoning. They trained you there, so they were especially cruel masters. They basically wanted to get you, break your mind, like to Chindy's point, break you to where you could kind of be a functional slave in America. So Boukman really was giving them, for lack of a better term, heck on Jamaica, and they couldn't deal with him anymore, and they sold him. You know, they were like, listen, we gotta get you off the island. You just, and they sold him to Haiti, perhaps thinking, okay, well, he doesn't speak the language, he's not from the, same thing, but they had a connection, and he was kind of centered again back in African spirituality, African identity. He sort of fostered that. And another point about Boukman that I wish, for our youth to know, he was literate. Someone taught him how to read, so he knew. He was taking parts of the Bible, the subversive parts, and reading it to, his fellows, as former slaves, and also reading other things and sort of imparting information that way.
December 4th marked, I believe, the 48th anniversary of the assassination of General Fred Hampton of the Black Panther Party, Illinois chapter, was killed in 1969 in his home with his wife, unborn child. I actually do speak with Fred Hampton Jr. Regularly. I had an excellent interview with him, and unfortunately it wasn't recorded or it got deleted. But it was a great interview, and hopefully we'll be able to do it again. But he talks about what we talked about a little bit earlier, the Western power in the back, and what you see, and even with this Kaepernick situation, and we talk about Mackendall and taking out those individuals, if they are delivering a message, right, that is supposed to be so-called subversive, but they're getting airtime, controlled by the powers that be, that we have to scratch our head, look at it for what it is, and give it critical thinking. If this gentleman, Kaepernick, I'm going off, I'm coming back, is a true revolutionary, why is he getting so much airtime? Why is he winning books? Why is he winning awards? Time Magazine. Has Time Magazine ever been in front of black people? So, with that being said, and what you said about Boukman, tying the two together, about some of the things that was left out, and obviously, I'm sure Tariq Nasheed, you probably had 5 hours of information, you had to scale it down to 2, and hopefully maybe that 3 hours can be given to someone else, and we can take the initiative to do the search and research and do something here in regards to this. Is what we have to get into the mindset of when we say they don't talk about it. We know they ain't gonna talk about it. They're gonna give us just enough for us not to be hungry anymore. And if we're sated with that, then we're sated with that. But if we have more information, then we have resources, because we have something to talk about now. We got cameras and all stuff. We can do documentaries. We can just do your iPhone, and we can figure out, and we can find, and we can subsidize, and we can create. From Kickstarter, they have the Kickstarter program where you can have people who give donations. We can tell more about Boukman. We can have a whole documentary about Dirty Boukman and his significance in the 1804 revolution. Tariq, you want to say something before I
Well, no, you didn't really cut me off. You asked an interesting question, and I guess this is where we can leave it as far as the past with the present. I don't think Kaepernick is getting a platform. I think he did something kind of brilliant. I mean, let's put it this way. I'm going to entertain what you said, and it could be 50% likely. And another likelihood is the fact that he simply knew the nature of how conservative the NFL was, and just knew that was the way to sort of agitate the discussion. Mm-hmm. So if I sit out in this sort of traditional conservative organization that is pro-military recruitment and taking this patriotic posture, that if I do that during this game, is going to garner the attention to the point I need to make. So if I want to make a point, then I have to do a protest that's going to elevate me to get the sort of thing. So just by virtue of him not getting hired, it's sort of like his penance he's paying to be able to, make his points that he wants. So he's actually collecting money for issues, he's collecting money for organizations, and he's redistributing it. So he's using that sort of contention to get his point across. So I mean, I see your point too also, that okay, who do they ever, someone who's really speaking truth to power, and they're being kind of, for lack of a better term, I don't know why we consider people who talk about issues in their community radical, but if they're being so-called radical, they don't get the platform. It's to be determined, though, because I think sometimes there are enough people that agree with you that they know that they can get those listeners. So if he were to come down to WCAA, the whole Albany and everyone who could tune in will be tuned in, listening to what Kaepernick has to say. So I think it's just sort of like an understanding of knowing how to play the game, as it will. So if I do this protest in this organization, yes, they're going to blackball me. For like, what is it called? Blackball? I think that's the term. Yeah, so they're going to, blackball me or boycott me or whatever, and thus I will get the airtime in other venues to talk about that injustice, and also, guess what, I'm raising money for this.
Yeah.
So I think it's like a tactic, but I mean, you could also, it could be 50% likely that that's the case also.
Yeah, that's a type of different conversation. Go ahead.
Yeah, yes, and I list you. There are different type of resistors. I think the Haitian Revolution shows us about, I think, 4 or 5 types of resistors. I mean, you look at Boukman, Mackendale, Toussaint, Dessalines. These are different types of people. I mean, Toussaint was more of a compromiser, was willing to compromise and work around the system, figure out the Western system. He identifies more with my type of resistance, which is, you have to find a way to subvert the system using their own skills. But some people go to this African spirituality. We need all those resources together. So in a way, Kaepernick is using one part of resistance. He's an NFL player. He was at one point the best quarterback, in the league.
Yeah.
And right now he's still among the top 10 best quarterbacks in the league, but they won't hire him.
Right.
It shows how the system works. And so they couldn't just ignore him. There are a lot of conservatives, a lot of people are very sensitive to anything that insults the flag or the military, or anything that, even though this is not what he was doing, by the way, but anything that is even insinuating insulting the flag or insulting the military. And so he had to send a message to that establishment that you guys are not listening to us, and if you continuously don't listen to us, or your institutions, we're not going to show respect for your institutions, because your institutions are not standing for us. Your institutions are suppressing us.
Yeah.
So he sent a message in that.
The connection between, obviously, 1804, we're talking about now, and Colin Kaepernick, different ways of resistance, different ways of revolution. Malcolm X talked about a bloodless revolution in terms of people giving the power structure that opportunity to right the wrongs before we act. And if we act, it will cripple your government. If we just separate from the system in and of itself and start partaking, the system will collapse on itself. Basically, like you said, we're wage slaves who don't make enough to live a proper life. This is a gentleman, I believe he called it, what did he call it? He called it, it was ethnic cleansing, American style. Where you just don't make enough money to live.
That's true.
You can't find the proper lodgings, or you can't eat right. So you're eating things that are detrimental to your health, but they're cheap and they're affordable, because you never go into the organic grocery stores to get healthy food, vegetables for your family. So you go months, maybe even years without eating the proper things.
Yes.
And you're setting yourself up years down the line to die at 35, 40 years old of some type of very, very destructive cancer. And I've seen cancer do its worst. It turns you inside out. You literally look like a prune. And I had people in my family die that did not look exactly like they did at their best. You have that picture when they're strong and they're healthy, and then at the end, they just wasted away. And it's very, very unfortunate. And this is all by design. This is the design that's been set up because they don't want another 1804. You gotta remember, how many powers did the Haitian people beat? It was like 7 different superpowers that they were coming in waves. They were just...
They beat the British.
Beat the British. I think it was the French.
Absolutely.
They're always there.
They facilitated America becoming America, really. America was just a smattering of colonies, and the Louisiana Purchase, because France was broke.
Right.
Things of that nature is all a function of Haiti.
Wow. Let's end this right here, because this is good. This is real good, and I'm going to take this, and I'm going to put this on, get your hand in my pocket, and you guys are my big friends, and I'm going to tag you on it, because this is I didn't expect for this. I just come down here for some training, and boom, You get three minds in the room.
Special collaboration with the radio show.
Yes. Collaborations. Talk about unify. That's the synonym of unification. Collaboration. And we connect with each other, and we meet on a common goal. We all have a common goal. We all have a common analogy.
Yes.
And all the people in this room are melanated culture. I'm being nice because we're on, we're Grand Street, but in the podcast it's something different. I just said something different. Big Brother Anthony, no, I just said something different. But we're gonna go ahead and hear. My name is Mr. X. Thank you for listening. WCAALP 107.3 FM, the Hearts over in New York. And I have a voice in Albany. See you.
Welcome